What if Black Sabbath played big band swing? That's the alternative timeline we'll be exploring on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I pick a different popular song and imagine an alternative timeline in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely differently from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I have to hand in order to bring that alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was War Pigs by Black Sabbath, and I attempted to turn that into a big band swing song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster.
In the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh Lord, yeah.
Must confess, this video has been sitting ready to go for a little while now. I originally intended to have it ready to coincide with the Black Sabbath reunion show. The big final show they had planned was slightly late for that. And then, of course, tragically, Ozzy passed away, which was horrible. And I just thought it doesn't really seem appropriate to be putting this out now. I really didn't want anyone to think that I was in any way poking fun at Ozzy or making light of his passing. So didn't want to release it at that point. So I've just hung on to it for a little while. Thought, a bit of time's passed now. Hopefully I can put this out. People will take it for what it is, which is kind of a fun, light-hearted tribute to Black Sabbath, not in any way any kind of parody, because Black Sabbath has been a very important band to me for most of my life. I think when I was getting into guitar music, the first sort of heavy rock band I got into was Van Halen, but hot on the heels. Black Sabbath, I bought at a car boot sale somewhere a cassette of just greatest hits. The one with the Hieronymus Bosch painting on the front, and it absolutely blew my mind. Every single track was an absolute classic. Obviously just snapped up all the classic albums as quickly as I could. I was lucky enough to be growing up at a time when the vast majority of music listeners seemed to be getting rid of their vinyl collections because the view was that vinyl was dead and CDs were the future, so you could go to second-hand shops or car boot sales and just find classic LPs for £1.50p, so I managed to pick up all those classic Sabbath albums for, pocket money, including, believe it or not, this is a first press of Paranoid, which I got from a charity shop for, I think, 50 pence at the time. It's a bit beaten up, but to get a first press of Paranoid for 50 pence, that was the time I was growing up in. It was very lucky for me. So yeah, I was converted to Sabbath at the age of 9, and I've never looked back, really. I've always been very much an Ozzy-era Sabbath fan, really. I do like the Ronnie James Dio stuff, and I've dabbled in the Tony Martin era, although it's never really stuck with me. Although weirdly, the Tony Martin era band was almost the second gig I ever went to see. I had tickets to go and see them at the Sand Centre in Carlisle, but unfortunately I think Tony got ill and it was cancelled, but that was a real shame because I would have been very excited to see that. But yeah, the Ozzy era for me is just perfection. And I think Sabbath are a very rare band indeed, in that they're one of the few bands where their arrival really marks a massive change and the dividing line between one thing that's obviously developing towards something else and then the new thing, if you see what I mean. Like, I've read lots of arguments about what the first metal record was, and people will dig through the past and find loads of things that have elements of what became heavy metal, and someone will say it was Iron Butterfly, and someone else will say, oh no, well, what about My Generation by The Who with its big power chord riff? But then someone else will say, oh, but You Really Got Me by The Kinks was earlier. Another person again will come out with, I don't know, the Rumble by Link Ray with its distorted distorted guitars, and there's so much stuff that's proto-metal, all the way from those early pioneers, the first electric blues players to crank up their amps so everything distorted, through to heavy psychedelic bands like Blue Cheer and Vanilla Fudge, and they're all important proto-metal. But that first Sabbath album, that is the start of heavy metal. Everything before it is proto-metal. That is the one point where suddenly there was no metal before, now there is metal. It's obviously indebted to all that other stuff that's gone before. You can still hear plenty of the blues in there. It's not a million miles away from what Cream or the Yardbirds had been doing in terms of heavy blues rock, but there's just a step away from that as well. You hear the riff to the title track, that massive, monolithic, discordant riff, and that's not the blues. And rhythmically, there's no boogie to that. It's not in any way connected back to Chicago R&B or anything. That's something else entirely. And the lyrics, again, just taking a step away from blues rock concerns. I mean, the blues had dabbled with dealings with the devil since the very early days. I mean, you've got Robert Johnson singing about having a hellhound on his trail back in the 1930s, but the way Sabbath are dealing with it in their lyrics is a whole other thing. It's this very dark, cinematic portrayal of actual occult horror. And there are precedents for that as well. I mean, you can certainly look at Coven, who were, as far as I'm aware, the first sort of actively Satan-courting rock band. But again, Coven, although they're an important step, not metal, they're definitely much more of a kind of psychedelic rock band. Sabbath just brought those elements together in a way that made it something absolutely new. And although all the metal bands who sprang up in their wake will also have taken from the various other proto-metal bands, Sabbath's kind of hard rock contemporaries like Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, if they're playing true metal, Sabbath is absolutely the root, it's ground zero. And it's an incredible achievement, absolutely incredible, untouchable band. And it was really nice when they came together for that final concert to see just the widespread celebration of their legacy. And then obviously absolutely heartbreaking to have Ozzy leave us just so soon afterwards. But yeah, it was just really nice to see them just getting such widespread acknowledgement of the importance of what they've brought to music. And one of the things that I really enjoyed seeing with that reunion was seeing Bill Ward again, because he's such a wonderful drummer. And although Sabbath have done various reunions with Ozzy over the years, Bill Ward's position in that has always been a bit shaky, but it was absolutely right to have Bill there for the final show, just because every metal drummer owes so much to him. I was thinking about his playing, and one of the things that's always made his playing so great is just the incredible sense of swing that he has. And you can really tell that his drumming style is rooted in listening to the great big band drummers. And I feel like that sort of link from metal back to big band music is one that is not really acknowledged enough. I think the lineage is always just seen as, guitar blues through rock and roll into metal. Obviously, there's a clear line there. But in a way, I would argue that swing is almost just as important an element in the origins of that music. First off, as I say, in terms of drumming, I think that entire generation of heavy rock drummers, the people who took rock music from basic rock and roll into this harder, heavier variant, every last one of those guys grew up listening to big band swing and was influenced by that generation of big band drummers. Mitch Mitchell, Ginger Baker, Bill Ward, Ian Pace, all of these legendary rock drummers were all raised on Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson. I think big band swing was definitely the first kind of popular music that allowed drummers to really flourish. Certainly the first kind of mass distributed pop music that really enabled drummers to properly hit. Your earlier recorded popular music, I guess a lot of it is down to technology. the kind of acoustic recording technology that existed in the early days of recorded popular music. It was really sensitive, so if you had a drummer, they were generally just playing very far away from the recording, playing quietly, just tapping away, because if they started hitting things, it was going to cause the physical recording device to go awry and completely mess up the take, and you'd have to start again. Whereas by the time the big bands were coming through, you've got electronic recording, it can actually handle recording a drummer, plus you've got bigger ensembles that are making more noise, so drummers actually really need to lay into their kit a bit more to be heard above that. So you get these large ensembles playing music for dancing, so it needs this driving beat. As a result, a whole generation of these heroic drummers emerges, from the likes of Chick Webb through Louis Bellson, who is massively influential in the Duke Ellington band. As far as I'm aware, the first drummer ever to use a double kick kit, which obviously was picked up on by so many rock drummers. And Gene Krupa, who was just kind of a madman behind the kit with all this showmanship and his kind of wild flailing. Again, just things that were taken directly from these big band drummers and transplanted into rock music. So in terms of drumming, so much of what we know in rock comes directly from swing, but I think it's more than just that. I think as well, when you think of hard rock or metal and the way it's constructed, as a form of music, it's entirely built on riffs. And although you definitely do hear riffs in blues, particularly once you get to the amplified Chicago blues, I would certainly argue that the first form of popular music to be entirely based on riffs was big band swing. That's the movement in pop music where the idea of just locking into a big riff and really hammering it home, and that being enough to form the basis of a song, that's where that idea comes from. Particularly if you listen to some of the harder, bluesier big bands like the Count Basie Orchestra, so much of that stuff is just these really great, driving, powerful riffs played with force and with volume and with propulsion. And to me, that is a vitally important root of heavy metal as well. And I think just also big band swing was really the first sort of truly popular music movement in which virtuoso soloists were really kind of widely celebrated. I guess in earlier Dixieland jazz, you did have a few notable soloists emerging, obviously Louis Armstrong significantly, but I think it was really in the big band era where that kind of fandom about musical virtuosity and the individual performers in a group kind of really took hold. So a big band gets popular and the fans know who all the members of the band are. You're watching the Basie Orchestra and you're waiting for the moment where Lester Young takes his solo, and that's where you start getting magazines having readers' polls to people to vote for best sax player, the best trumpeter, and this whole cult around these virtuoso musicians, which is to me totally something that carried over into rock music and particularly into heavy rock and metal. I definitely remember, reading Metal Hammer and Kerrang as a kid and just being this constant dialogue going on letters pages and in readers' polls about, who's the best guitarist. And again, that seems to me to be another sort of aspect that has carried straight through from the big band days through to heavy rock. And I'm pretty sure that if you go into the right subreddits, you can probably still see those conversations happening to this day. So yeah, all this is just to say that while pairing Black Sabbath with big band swing might not seem to make much sense at a glance, as far as I'm concerned, there is actually a significant link going on between those two styles. And if you think about it the right way, maybe we could add the Count Basie Orchestra to that list of proto-metal influences. But yeah, anyway, that leads me to this week's alternative universe scenario. So in our alternative universe this week, most things are the same as in our own universe, except that in this timeline, all the members of Black Sabbath were born 20 years earlier than they were in our own world. So they've grown up through the war years. They're just coming of age in Birmingham post-World War II. All interested in music, they start off playing in assorted small jazz combos here and there, but then towards the end of the 1940s they come together with a shared dream of making a bigger sound. So the four core members come together. That's obviously Tony Iommi on guitar, Terry Geezer Butler on double bass, Bill Ward on the drums, and the vocalist John Ozzy Osbourne. And they hire a cast of various horn players who come and go, whereas those four remain constant members of the band. So they get this band together together, christen it the Black Sabbath Orchestra, and they make the decision early on that they're going to write their own material. They're not going to just play arrangements of standards like most big bands do. They really want to, make their own sound. So they soon build up a reputation in the Midlands for having a really unusual, forceful sound. They've got this wild lead singer who has a voice that's really different to the kind of popular crooning style. They look a bit unkempt and a bit dangerous, and they become a bit of a sensation around the ballrooms of the Midlands. Eventually this comes to the attention of the Victor Recording Company, who bring them in for a recording session, and they cut one of these original pieces that they've been writing, which goes on to be their sole release, their only 78 RPM single that they release on Victor, which is the song War Pigs. But yeah, unfortunately, because the song has this powerful anti-war message, it really contrasts to the patriotic fervour that's gripped the country in the wake of World War II. So it's blacklisted by radio, and then once that news gets out, there's people are writing about it in the papers in a negative light, so they start to find that ballrooms no longer want to hire them, and unfortunately it really stymies their career, and sadly the band breaks up. But this one release becomes a cult record and resurfaces in the 1960s as sort of harder rock bands are starting up, and becomes a cultural touchstone for this new generation of bands who are inspired by its dark lyrics and its driving riffs to create this new form of heavier rock. So, in order to attempt to create a big band swing arrangement of War Pigs, my first step as ever was just taking Ozzy's isolated vocal, dropping it into GarageBand and getting it synced up to the grid. Once I'd done that, the next step was popping some drums on. It's always tricky to try and get an authentic sounding swing on GarageBand, and it has a feature that theoretically will quantize things to a swing, but it's very much a kind of machine swing, not a human swing feel. So I played in all the basic rhythms just on the MIDI keyboard, and then went back in and tidied things up and added fills and stuff to just try and make it feel like it's actually being played by a human being. The sound I used is the jazziest sounding kit I could find on there, which is, it's kind of played with brushes, which works on the quieter sections, maybe doesn't have quite the right attack for the louder bits, but it was about the best fit I could find for this particular track. I added some bass using GarageBand's studio upright bass sound, so again played in on the MIDI keyboard, just doing my best to create a fairly standard big band sounding walk-in bass that hits the important root notes but also keeps some movement going underneath there. The one actual real instrument that's on the entire track is the guitar, which I put on next. So just one guitar track. But for the most part, that's just playing chords, trying to play in that sort of Freddie Green in the Count Basie Orchestra kind of style. Quite unobtrusive, just blending in with the rhythm section, filling out the sound and keeping that harmonic movement going. And then I've got just like a few bars of lead that pop up just before the final verse. I'm no Charlie Christian as far as swing lead guitar goes, but it was fun to have like a little kind of couple of bars twiddle there. And then the final instrument in the rhythm section was the piano. I'm a terrible pianist, but I did my best to actually play in the parts as much as I could, and then went back in and did an awful lot of editing and tidying up, and all the runs and fills that I'd botched horrifically went back in and actually manually placed the notes where they were supposed to be. So a lot of the time that's just playing kind of little rhythmic stabs, but it's got a few little bits of leads and right hand augmentations as well to just keep things interesting. So with all that rhythm section in place, it was then time to put on the horns. Now, GarageBand horns aren't the best sounds, as I've said before in these videos. And the other thing that I've got as a source of brass instruments, at least, is a Spitfire Audio BBC Symphony Orchestra thing. But although those are great sounds, they're not particularly great for jazz, just don't really have an immediate enough attack. So I did try downloading, I found a pack of specifically big band horn samples which were meant to be compatible with GarageBand, which I downloaded, but just couldn't get them to work at all. So I had to make do with what sounds I had, since I'd already recorded the rhythm section and didn't want to give up. So they don't sound that authentic, but hopefully all blended together, they don't sound too bad. So just did my best to get in some of the recognisable bits of big band arrangements that I've always enjoyed, with emphasis on the riffs. It was really good fun trying to turn Tony Iommi's guitar riffs into riffs for a big band. So sometimes the entire ensemble just kind of hitting things in unison, but then sometimes dividing them up between sections, so you've got a bit of a call and response. Just trying to make use of the different textures that are available and trying to translate what happens on the original record into things that sound plausible in a big band context. And then for the video, as ever, started off by just trying to find some decent footage of the band playing the song back in the day. Frustratingly, the best footage that I found must be of them playing an early version of the song, because the lyrics are different to the ones on the record. So you'll notice that Ozzy's not actually mouthing the right words at various points, but yeah. It's close enough, and quite often his hair is kind of hiding exactly what he's mouthing anyway, so I figured it was probably okay. For the actual big band, I borrowed some footage of the Benny Goodman Orchestra. I also put a black and white filter over the Sabbath footage to make it blend in a bit better with the big band footage, so we've got their horn section in there mixed in with Sabbath. And then as a final touch, just to add a couple more bits to lend some period authenticity, I just did a couple of mock-ups. I managed to insert the Black Sabbath Orchestra into a couple of different things, and also mocked up the Victor Records record label for this one-off pressing of War Pigs that they did, which hopefully just kind of add a bit more to the atmosphere of the thing as well. So I hope you enjoyed this one. It was a great fun challenge for me, just trying to get to grips with at least some of the basic ideas of big band arrangement. It's not something I'll ever be expert at, but it was tremendously enjoyable just trying to listen to records and then figure out the basics of what's going on there. It's certainly not intended to be disrespectful. It's not meant to be a parody or a piss take. It's just meant to be a fun, light-hearted tribute to a band that I really love. So I do hope that people will have taken it in that light. Let me know what you think down in the comments anyway, and if you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. I always really appreciate your support. If there's anything else you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any songs or artists or genres you'd like me to investigate, do let me know. I always do appreciate your suggestions as well. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching, and I will hope to see you next time.